Hello there, all of you absolutely lovely people. Once again, this is Dax, and we're back here on this channel doing another book review. This guy's my hero. The book review we'll be doing today will be for this book right here, a Bardon Companion, which of course is in reference to the very first book review I did, which was for this book, Initiation into Hermetics. Why are they connected? Because this book explains to you how to better understand this book. So there will be links to the original video up at the top of the screen. Now, the Bardon Companion, it's not just a walkthrough for the first book, but it is also the walkthrough for the second of Franz Bardon's books and the third. But a Bardon Companion. This is a book that I consider to be pseudo-required reading for Initiation into Hermetics. Why do I consider this to be pseudo-required reading? Well, it's because there have been many people in the past who have worked their way all the way through this book, and they didn't need a Bardon Companion. This book was written by Rawn Clark. Rawn Clark himself worked his way through this book without the help of this book. Nevertheless, this book makes it so much easier. The thing about Initiation into Hermetics is that because Franz Bardon was Czechoslovakian, the original edition of this book was not in English. What I'm holding here in my hand is an English translation. And an English translation means mistranslations. You glance over this book and at first appearance it appears to be very well translated. Everything seems to make sense when you read it. However, there have been times that I've been working through a practice on that book that I thought that I was failing to achieve the practice when in reality what it was, I was attempting to put into practice a mistranslation. This book explains when that sort of thing is happening. Now, before I go any further, most of you watching this video will already know about Initiation into Hermetics. For those of you who do not know, this is a book that if your goal is to become a real-life wizard and you can't find a guru to teach you, you can treat this book like your guru. By the time you've worked your way through this book, you will have become a wizard. Now, of course, Franz Bardon wrote 3 books in his series here, but the thing is, each book in the series is in and of itself a lifetime's worth of work. So don't expect to just go through this thing in a month and come out Harry Potter. It's not going to happen. You are going to have to dedicate yourself to it. This makes it easier by not only pointing out the mistranslations, but it also goes through and explains each exercise in greater detail. It explains to you, well, first of all, it mentions things that Franz Bardon did not mention in the book. This book here also explains what the actual goals are of the exercises, things that Franz Bardon either expected you to read between the lines, or things that the translator of the book expected you to read between the lines. This book right here goes in and explains all of that in greater detail. In addition to walking you through the steps, this book also has many questions and answer sections in the book. Rawn Clark has spent probably, well, this is the second edition of the book, and he mentioned that he wrote the first edition 8 years before this. And before he even wrote the first edition, he had already spent a lot of time clarifying the information of Franz Bardon for his students. Anyway, that's basically what this book does, is it clarifies translations, it goes through and walks you through all the steps in greater detail, kind of fills in the blanks for you, and also it has entire sections of questions people have asked Rawn Clark over the years that he answers. So a wealth of information in here. Once again, you don't need it to walk through this book. Many people have done so without it, but this book makes it so much easier to do. Reading through this book, you realize that many of the things that you thought you were stuck on, you really weren't. It allows you to move forward through the book. Now, the basic format of this book. This book is, well, I guess you can say it's divided into two sections. Because once again, as I said, this is the second edition of a Bardon Companion. And the layout of the book is this. It starts out with the second edition text of Initiation into Hermetics, which Initiation into Hermetics is pretty much the only book in the trilogy that this book contains a second edition to, which makes sense because Initiation into Hermetics is the most important of the three books. The second and third books require mastery of the first in order to really even be able to put them to any use. So the only second edition text in this book is for Initiation into Hermetics. And once again, he walks you through the different steps. He also spends some time discussing about how the human psyche hates change and will do everything it can to keep things the same, because as far as your psyche is concerned, the way things are now is safe and change is dangerous. So even if the change is good, your psyche will fight you on it. And he spends some time discussing that, how to overcome your psyche. That's the chapter 1 section. Then he goes on to discuss about how section 2 should be about creativity and play. You should be having fun with section 2. And then section 3, he goes on and discusses the 4 pillars of Solomon's Temple and what Franz Bardon actually meant by that, and etc., etc. He goes through the entire book, second edition. Then after he's done with the second edition text of Initiation into Hermetics, he then goes through his first questions and answers section of the book. He answers many of the questions that his students and other Franz Bardon students have asked him about the process. But then this book does something very interesting, something that most second edition books do not do. He then goes through and proceeds to include the entire first edition of the book, so you can read the changes that were made between the first edition and the second edition. He also has a question and answer section for the first edition. Then he prints out the first edition of this book right here, The Secret of Magical Evocation, the second book in his series. So you get all the information on how to walk through on that. Once again, only really the first edition text for this. He didn't update this for the second edition. And then he goes into the key to the True Kabbalah for the third book in the series. So the entire trilogy is covered. The first book in the series he covers twice. Once again, I consider this to be pseudo-required reading for any Franz Bardon student. Not everyone will need it. In fact, you can work through the book without it. However, this book just answers so many questions that is left out of that book. Whether it's because Franz Bardon didn't include it, or if it was a product of the mistranslation, whatever it was, this book fills in the blanks. So I would highly recommend any Franz Bardon student who is working their way, especially through the first book, pick this sucker up. Now this is, of course, part of my 30-day challenge. This is the 9th video in my 30-day video challenge. That means a video a day, every day, for 30 days, no matter what. I thank you for joining me in this great adventure that we call not only the challenge, but also life itself. I love you all. Always remember, you are important. You are loved. Your needs are valid. But the same is also true for everyone else. My hero concurs. Love you all. See you next time.